There is a certain kind of island that breaks theories. Sulawesi is one of them. It sits in Wallacea, the jagged, restless middle zone between Asia and Australia, a shattered geography of sea trenches, limestone towers and jungle ridgelines that never quite belong to the Asian continent, and never quite belong to the Australian one either. In the National Geographic narrative, this region is merely a corridor. Homo sapiens enters Southeast Asia around 50,000 years ago, hops across islands, reaches Sahul, becomes the ancestors of Indigenous Australians. And then history begins. Everything prior is a kind of preface. Everything prior is almost not allowed to happen. But in the caves of Sulawesi, the preface has become the story. And in one limestone cave after another, the island keeps producing an archaeological insult, not just early Homo sapiens traces, but evidence of something older, much older than the behavioral revolution, older than the 50K dispersal myth, older than the outdated idea that the world's deep human past can be reduced to a single exit event from Africa, followed by tidy replacement. Sulawesi, it turns out, was not waiting for us. It already had a modern human history 75,000 years ago. And now the island is forcing a terrifying question into the open. What if our species shared an already inhabited Asian world, not metaphorically, but literally? And what if the boundary between archaic humans and modern humans was never stable? Liang Bulu Betu is not famous in the way some Ice Age caves in France are famous. Its walls don't automatically appear in textbooks. It doesn't play the role we assign to great human origin monuments because it sits too far outside the traditional stage, far from the comforting African to Europe corridor where modern human prehistory has been narrated for a century. But underground, in the sediment, it does something more subversive than famous art. It accumulates time. It stacks time in 8 meters of deposits. It preserves continuity where the orthodoxy needs discontinuity. And if you let the cave speak in its own chronology, one of the most widely repeated ideas in anthropology, the idea of a decisive out-of-Africa migration starts to sound less like a conclusion and more like pseudoscience. The story is elegant because it is simple, but Sulawesi is not a simple place. Sulawesi sits in Wallacea, a broken geography of islands and deep-water channels that never formed a continuous land bridge to Asia or Australia. Its significance should have been obvious from the beginning. Any humans who reached it had to do something the outdated models hate. They had to cross water, repeatedly. And that means that Sulawesi is not merely a stopping point on the way to Australia. It is a test of capability, planning, continuity, adaptation. It is, in effect, a lie detector for migration models. There is also evidence of ancient humans in the Philippines dated to 700,000 years ago and Flores dated 1 million years ago. However, American paleoanthropologist Russell Coichon said there is no way that Homo erectus or other hominins used boats, and water dispersal was accidental. There is no manifest destiny, no plot, he told National Geographic. The cave excavation at Liang Bulu Betu has been underway since 2013. The researchers describe it as a near-continuous archaeological record of Pleistocene occupation, 8 meters of cultural deposits, and the deepest and oldest evidence for human activity in those deposits dating to earlier than 132,300 to 208,400 years ago. That number is not a matter of interpretation. These tools are the kind used by archaic hominins, possibly even Homo erectus-like creatures. It is a matter of what the dirt contains and where. It pushes Sulawesi's record into a time zone that the outdated out-of-Africa story tried to keep empty. Asia was supposed to be empty, inhabited by only Homo erectus-grade humans before 50,000 years ago. The earlier phases show stone artifact production and animal butchery. They show heavy-duty stone tools described as picks. They show a technological tradition that did not briefly appear like a flash and vanish. It persisted long enough to leave a stratified archive. The cave, in other words, preserves not just a moment, but a lifestyle. And now comes the part that makes some people uncomfortable. The cave is not just older than expected, It is older than the conceptual box the out-of-Africa theory has built around itself. When the reports say these activities occurred long before our species had left Africa, it is not merely describing a date, it is describing a contradiction. The contradiction can be resolved only by abandoning the simplistic story or by performing a familiar maneuver. Deciding the cave must not really mean what it appears to mean. That maneuver is everywhere in paleoanthropology. It is the unspoken escape hatch. When a site threatens the framework, the burden shifts. The site becomes guilty until proven innocent. Its dating is questionable. Its artifacts are ambiguous. Its stratigraphy is disturbed. Its tool type is transitional. And if the date survives scrutiny anyway, then a different excuse becomes available. The people must have gone extinct. In this way, the out-of-Africa model protects itself. It creates a loophole where any evidence of early humans outside Africa can be tolerated as long as those humans conveniently disappear without leaving lasting ancestry, ghost populations that never matter. The result is a theory that cannot be falsified because it can always declare inconvenient groups irrelevant. Lieng Bulu Betu forces the question harder because it does not stand alone. It sits atop an even deeper insult to the standard story. The researchers' earlier work suggests archaic hominins occupied Sulawesi from at least 1 million years ago. 1 million years is not a typo. It implies that the island had a resident hominin world long before Homo sapiens existed, a world that could have developed local adaptations, local cultures, local technologies. When modern humans later arrive, they do not arrive to a blank map. They arrive into someone else's territory, which means that if Homo sapiens reaches Sulawesi by 65,000 years ago, as the researchers suggest, in association with the initial peopling of Australia, then Sulawesi becomes something the theory doesn't want it to be, an overlap zone, a contact frontier, a place where two different human lineages could have shared the same ecological space. This is not a small point, because overlap is dangerous. Overlap undermines the myth of replacement. It introduces complexity, interaction, competition, assimilation, hybridization, cultural borrowing. It makes the world look less like a single species conquering the earth and more like what genetics is increasingly revealing, a braided river of populations, sometimes distinct, sometimes merging, sometimes replacing one another by absorption rather than extermination. Sulawesi offers the possibility of direct archaeological evidence for that overlap, something rare in the fossil record and almost impossible to prove in the tropics, where preservation is notoriously poor. The report also describes a dramatic cultural break around 40,000 years ago. Earlier, cobble-based core and flake technologies and faunal assemblages dominated by dwarf bovids, anoas, Labrador-sized wild cattle endemic to Sulawesi, alongside now-extinct Asian straight-tusked elephants, are replaced by a distinct toolkit, and for the first time on the island, clear evidence of artistic expression and symbolic behavior. This later phase, the researchers suggest, reflects the arrival of Homo sapiens and the replacement of an earlier population. Notice what is buried inside that phrasing: replacement. Replacement can mean extinction or it can mean absorption. It can mean population turnover without genetic disappearance. But if you need out of Africa to remain simple, you will treat replacement as erasure. You will treat it as a convenient extinction. One group vanishes, another arrives, the story stays clean. It's telling that Sulawesi, of all places, is where this becomes visible. Australia does not offer this kind of layered confrontation because, as the report bluntly notes, Australia was only ever inhabited by Homo sapiens. You can dig as deep as you like, and you won't find earlier hominins. Sulawesi is different. It contains the pre-Homo sapiens world and the Homo sapiens world stacked on top of each other. If you dig deep enough, the researchers say, you might reach the point where two species came face to face. Who were these people? Ancient skulls from Wojak in Java and Deep Cave in Borneo, both dated to around 40,000 years ago, offer clues. The Wojak skull has morphological continuity with Chinese Liaojing and Upper Cave skulls, both dated to around 35,000 years ago. And then, on the southeastern region of Sulawesi, in a limestone cave on Muna Island, comes the kind of evidence that shifts the debate from specialists to everyone else. A hand stencil, sprayed in ochre, pressed into stone, the intimate signature of a person who stood there and wanted to be seen. Now a new report describes the discovery at Liang Metanduno, where the outline had been overlooked among more recent paintings. By dating tiny calcite deposits that formed over the top of the drawing, archaeologists assign it a minimum age of at least 67,800 years and a maximum of 75,400 years. This is not a speculative date. It is not an argument about style. It is the calcite itself, time accreted into stone, sealing the art like a timestamp. Was it made by modern humans or something else? We know that modern humans were in India and Asia by this time, so there is no reason to think it wasn't. The emotional power of the drawing is almost unbearable because it collapses time. It also collapses the complacent assumption that symbolic expression is late and European and exclusive. The hand stencils were made by spraying mouthfuls of ochre mixed with water over a hand pressed to the cave wall. The report notes that this stencil has narrow, pointy fingers and may have been intentionally modified, perhaps to resemble claws, perhaps some symbolic creature. However, there is disagreement. One archaeologist argues complexity may be overinterpreting and notes that Neanderthals were modifying hand stencils too. This becomes another problem for the simplistic narrative. If Neanderthals were making cave marks at least 64,000 years ago in Spain, then the comfortable association of art with modern superiority weakens. It forces an even more radical conclusion. The symbolic world was shared across human types, or independently invented or transferred through contact. Either way, it stops being a clean Homo sapiens signature. The evidence makes clear how difficult it is to date rock art and how transformative it is when you can. But there is a rhetorical move by some anthropologists to suggest dating methods are unreliable when they give wrong answers. Geneticist Johannes Krauss of the Max Planck Institute in Germany in a recent conference made the stunning statement that all evidence of humans outside of Africa before 50,000 years ago are from extinct lineages, or they are dated wrong because radiocarbon dating doesn't work. That kind of statement, even when made with nuance, becomes a cultural weapon. It gives the entire establishment permission to dismiss early sites en masse. Not because radiocarbon truly doesn't work, but because any method anywhere can be framed as flawed when it produces heresy. This is not science. This is pseudoscience. And here is the critical point. Radiocarbon is not even the only story here. The Liang Bulu Betu sequence goes back well beyond radiocarbon's range. The hand stencil was dated using calcite deposits over the art. The tools were dated using luminescence. Multiple methods, multiple contexts, multiple lines of evidence, and yet the reflex remains. If it doesn't fit the 50K dispersal, it becomes misdated. If it survives scrutiny, the people become extinct. The model continues, untouched, like a doctrine that cannot be contradicted. Evidence from India is particularly lethal because it shows the same defensive behavior from another angle. At Atirampakam, near Chennai in India, archaeologists uncovered more than 7,000 tools made using the Levallois technique, small, sharp flakes produced from a prepared turtle shell core, and dated them by luminescence to between 385,000 and 172,000 years ago. This stunned researchers because Levallois has long been framed as part of a package spreading with dispersing Homo sapiens around 125,000 years ago. But if India has Levallois-like technologies hundreds of thousands of years earlier, then either humans left Africa far earlier than the story allows, or archaic humans across different regions independently developed the technique. Both possibilities are catastrophic for the simplistic model. Notice what happens next. The pushback arrives. Michael Petralia, also from the Max Planck Institute, says he does not believe the tools should be classified as Middle Paleolithic. He calls them transitional. This is a familiar maneuver. It is not necessarily wrong, but it is revealing. When the dates are inconvenient, the labels become flexible. The category shifts like sand. A tool tradition that looks like Levallois becomes not really Levallois. A behavioral package becomes not really modern. A site becomes not really reliable. The narrative remains protected. But it is precisely this pattern that makes Sulawesi and India such a paired threat. They show that the world outside Africa did not wait for a single late dispersal event to become sophisticated. They show that complex tool-making and persistent occupation existed deep in time in regions that are supposed to be peripheral in the human story. They show that the middle chapters of human evolution were not confined to Africa and the Levant. They were happening in South Asia and island Southeast Asia too, whether we have the fossils yet or not. And the absence of fossils becomes another defense mechanism, who done it, as one expert says, because without skulls and bones, out of Africa theorists can postpone the narrative crisis indefinitely. This is why the Sulawesi evidence is so powerful. It is not merely about an early Homo sapiens arrival. It is about the existence of another world beneath Homo sapiens, a deeper human world. The report's phrasing is careful but loaded. An archaic hominin cultural tradition persisted on Sulawesi well into the late Pleistocene. That means that late in time, closer to us than many people want to admit, there were still non-sapiens humans living in this region. When sapiens arrives, the island becomes a convergence point, not just of migrations, but of species. And if that convergence happened on Sulawesi, then true picture starts to resemble something closer to a Eurasian metapopulation system. Multiple dispersals, multiple refugia, repeated expansions and contractions, long-distance cultural parallels and occasional demographic turnovers that can masquerade as replacement events. And this is where the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Sulawesi suggests long-term occupation in a zone that requires seafaring. It suggests archaic persistence. It suggests overlap. It suggests that when Homo sapiens entered the broader world was already human. Sulawesi wasn't waiting. It was living, and now, day by day, in caves like Langbulu Betu, the sediment is dragging that forbidden truth into daylight. Thanks for watching.